I was scrolling through my feed the other day when I hit a wall of pure, unadulterated digital chaos. It was a video of a Malaysian creator and a South Korean influencer getting into what looked like a heated geopolitical standoff over, of all things, a bowl of spicy noodles and a misunderstood hand gesture. The comments section was a war zone. Thousands of people were taking sides, hurling nationalistic insults, and declaring that the beef between Malaysia and South Korea had finally reached a break-in point. One person wrote, "It's over, we can never be friends," while another claimed, "The cultural disrespect has gone too far." It felt like I was watching a diplomatic crisis unfold in real time, right there on my smartphone screen. But then I stepped back and looked at the actual data. While the comments section was screaming about a national divide, the reality on the ground told a completely different story. At the exact moment these users were declaring war online, Samsung was expanding its manufacturing plants in Malaysia, and over 400,000 South Korean tourists were peacefully booking flights to Kuala Lumpur and Kota Kinabalu. Trade between the two nations was quietly humming along at over $20 billion annually, and K-pop idols were still topping the Malaysian charts. That sudden disconnect, the jarring gap between the fiery conflict being manufactured by social media algorithms and the boringly stable reality of international diplomacy, left me wondering, how did we get to a point where a few viral misunderstandings and a bit of outrage bait can make two historically close partners look like bitter enemies? We've been told there's a massive beef brewing between these two cultures. But if you look past the TikTok filters and the angry captions, you have to ask, is this a real conflict, or are we just being fed a digital illusion designed to keep us clicking?
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic iceberg illusion, isn't it?
The iceberg illusion.
Right. You see the jagged, really noisy tip sticking out of the water, the angry comments, the reaction videos, the accusations of cultural theft, and it looks incredibly dangerous.
It looks massive, yeah. I mean, 10,000 comments isn't nothing.
It looks massive, exactly. But you're completely missing the 90% of the mass that is underwater. And, you know, in the case of Malaysia and South Korea, that underwater mass is boring, it's heavy, and it's made of absolute concrete economic reality.
Boring, heavy, and made of concrete. That doesn't exactly sound like a viral hook for a TikTok video.
No, it definitely doesn't.
But seriously, when you say illusion, are we dismissing the actual feelings of the people involved? Like, I saw those comments. That is a lot of noise.
It is noise, but noise isn't data. My job, and really what we're doing here today in this deep dive, is to walk you through the ledgers, not the comments section. We're going to look at what I like to call the quiet lattice.
The quiet lattice, catch.
Right, because while the internet is screaming about a massive divide, the actual machinery of statecraft, the shipping lanes, the energy grids, the diplomatic cables, that's all binding Malaysia and South Korea tighter than almost any two other nations in Asia.
Okay, so a quiet lattice. Sounds very stable.
Yeah.
So if we are going to debunk this beef, where do we even start? Because I'm looking at the notes we prepared for this, and the first thing on the list isn't K-pop, it isn't spicy noodles, it's copper foil.
Yes, copper foil.
And I feel like we just took a really hard left turn from social media drama straight into an engineering class.
Yes, if you want to understand why the beef is completely fake, you really have to understand the physics of an electric vehicle battery.
Okay, humor me. How does copper foil prove that Malaysia and South Korea are best friends?
So let's look at the hard reality first. We need to talk about SK Nexilis. This is a major South Korean company that decided to make a massive investment. We're talking approximately 650 billion Korean won.
Which is roughly, what, 2.3 billion ringgit?
Exactly, 2.3 billion ringgit to build their very first overseas production base. They didn't choose Vietnam. They didn't choose Indonesia. They didn't even choose China.
They chose Kota Kinabalu.
They chose Sabah, Malaysia.
Okay, 2.3 billion ringgit is an undeniably huge number. But, I mean, multinational companies spend big money all the time. Why is this specific factory so incredibly important to the relationship?
Because they aren't just building some random warehouse to store goods. They're building the world's largest production hub for copper foil. Now, do you actually know what copper foil does in an EV?
I assume it conducts electricity, like it's a wire, right? Or part of the wiring harness?
Not a wire, no. Think of it more like a wrapper. So in a lithium-ion battery, you have an anode and a cathode.
Right.
The anode, that's the negative side, it needs a current collector to facilitate the flow of electrons. That current collector is the copper foil.
Yeah.
But here is the complete engineering nightmare. To make an EV battery efficient, to give it that, 500-kilometer range that every consumer demands, that foil needs to be impossibly thin. We're talking about 4 to 6 micrometers.
4 to 6 micrometers. How thin is a human hair? for comparison?
A human hair is usually about 50 to 70 micrometers.
Wow.
So SK Nexilis is manufacturing a sheet of metal that is roughly 1/10 the thickness of a single human hair. And they are doing it in continuous rolls that are literally kilometers long.
1/10 of a hair. That sounds incredibly fragile. Like, how do you even transport that?
It is extremely fragile, and it has to be absolutely perfect. If there is a single wrinkle, one tiny tear, or literally a single impurity in that foil, the battery fails.
And if the battery fails, the car just stops.
Or worse, it catches fire. So when we talk about this factory in Sabah, we are definitely not talking about some low-skilled outsourced assembly line. We are talking about shipping the absolute highest precision proprietary technology that South Korea possesses directly to Borneo.
Man, that really puts the trust level into perspective.
Yeah.
You don't put that kind of highly sensitive proprietary tech in a country you are supposedly at war with over spicy noodles.
Exactly.
You don't. But why Sabah? I mean, I know Sabah is beautiful, but why put a high-tech battery component factory there? Why not just keep that vital technology in Seoul where it's safe and entirely under their control?
And it comes down to what we call the green trinity space, water and power.
Okay.
South Korea is incredibly energy hungry, but they are also very space constrained. But more importantly, the European car manufacturers, the people actually buying these batteries, like the Volvos and the BMWs, they are actively demanding carbon neutral supply chain.
Right. They've signed up for RE100.
RE100, the global pledge to use 100% renewable energy.
Right. And South Korea struggles to generate enough renewable energy for its own heavy industry just because of its physical geography.
Yes, but Sabah has the KKIP industrial complex, and it has massive, largely untapped potential for hydro and solar power. SK Nexilis went to Sabah specifically because that facility can commit to using 100% renewable electricity.
So Sabah basically becomes the green battery for the battery makers.
It is a completely symbiotic relationship. South Korea has the advanced tech but desperately needs the green power. Malaysia has the natural resources and the power stability, but they want the high-tech investment so they can move up the global value chain.
So this is what the sources meant by physical output driven by state capacity.
Exactly. You cannot move $24 billion.
Which was the total trade volume between the two nations in 2024.
Right. USD 24.01 billion to be exact. You cannot move that kind of capital without incredible mind-numbing coordination. You have MITI, the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry in Malaysia, working directly with their Korean counterparts day in and day out.
Just to ensure the grid is stable, the water is clean enough for the manufacturing process, and the logistics are seamless.
Exactly. And when you mention that $24 billion figure, that isn't just copper foil, that is the aggregate. That represents massive fleets of cargo ships navigating the South China Sea every single day.
We're talking electronics, electrical products, liquefied natural gas, petrochemicals.
The absolute heavy lifters of the global economy. If this trade relationship actually stopped because of some internet beef, lights would literally go out. Factories would grind to a halt.
It really makes the internet drama look incredibly petty when you put it like that. But this level of integration, it didn't just happen overnight. You don't just wake up on a Tuesday and decide to build a 2.3 billion ringgit factory. There has to be a long history there.
Oh, there's deep history. We are actually past the 40th anniversary of the Lukis policy.
Right, the LEP, initiated by Mahathir Mohamad back in 1982. I remember learning about this in school. The whole idea was basically stop looking at the West for our development model and start looking at Japan and South Korea.
Exactly, and it started very much as a mentorship. Malaysia sent students and workers to Seoul to learn their work ethic, to learn how to build bridges and cars, to study their rapid industrialization.
But it's evolved since 1982.
It has evolved drastically. It is no longer just teaching and learning. It is a full-blown strategic partnership, especially in high-tech, the green economy, and digital trade. And the ultimate culmination of all this groundwork is the MKFTA.
The Malaysia-Korea Free Trade Agreements.
Yeah.
We had the conclusion of negotiations signed by Tengku Zafrulaziz and Yeo Han-koo. But what does a free trade agreement actually change for the average person? Like, why should you care?
Because it creates a binding legal framework that locks the two economies together. It ensures duty-free access, meaning that for Malaysia, our products, things like food, herbal extracts, tropical timber, they enter the Korean market without hefty tariffs. And on the flip side, it signals to Korean investors that the door is open, it's safe, and it will stay open. It basically turns a political handshake into concrete law.
So, on one side of the equation, we have this hard reality. Copper foil, thinner than a hair, $24 billion in trade, and binding legal frameworks. That is a very solid foundation. But look, money isn't everything.
No, it's not.
People are emotional. We have deep-seated cultures. We have strict religions. We have completely different ways of seeing the world. And usually, historically anyway, this is exactly where the friction happens. This is where the beef actually starts.
And this brings us to what we call cultural negotiation. And frankly, this part is often significantly harder than building a billion-dollar factory.
Harder than making foil 1/10 of a hair thin.
Absolutely. You can engineer a copper foil production line with just physics and math. The laws of physics are exactly the same in Seoul as they are in Kota Kinabalu, but you cannot engineer cultural harmony with a calculator.
Which brings me to the second part of our deep dive. I really want to talk about the Minho narrative from the source material. I think it's a perfect example of what happens when commerce collides with culture.
It's a great case study.
So picture a South Korean food technologist. Let's just call him Minho. He works for a major company making spicy sauce.
Most likely gochujang, a fundamental staple of the Korean diet.
Right. And his company desperately wants to sell this very traditional sauce in the booming Malaysian market. But they hit a massive wall, which is halal certification, and specifically the incredibly rigorous standards set by JAKIM.
Right, and for context, JAKIM is recognized globally as one of the absolute strictest, most uncompromising halal certifying bodies in the world.
So initially, you can imagine Minho is just incredibly frustrated. He's sitting in his lab in Seoul, and he's thinking, look, this is our traditional recipe. It has been exactly this way for 100 years. Why do we have to change it? Why is this foreign bureaucracy getting in the way of our product?
It feels like an attack on his culinary tradition.
Exactly. It feels like cultural interference.
And it is a very common friction point. For a non-Muslim manufacturer, halal can initially seem like just an arbitrary set of bureaucratic hurdles. Take fermentation, for example. Gochujang is a fermented product. Natural fermentation processes inevitably produce trace amounts of alcohol. In Korea, that trace amount is completely irrelevant. Nobody cares. But under the strict JAKIM standard, that is a critical, non-negotiable compliance issue.
So Minho isn't just being asked to pay a fee and slap a nice little halal sticker on his bottle. He's being asked to fundamentally alter the chemistry of a traditional product.
He has to do a forensic audit of his entire supply chain. He has to check the physical brushes used to clean the vats 3 steps back in the supply chain just to make absolutely sure they weren't made with pig bristles.
Wow.
He has to source completely new enzymes that are certified halal. It is an exhaustive, deeply expensive, and time-consuming process.
He does it. The company does it. They spend the money and make the changes. Why? Why not just say, forget it, the Malaysian market is too difficult?
Because of a concept called collective survival. And this is where the cultural psychology gets fascinating. If we look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which is a well-known framework for comparing how different societies function, we can actually see why Malaysia and South Korea work surprisingly well together in these tense situations.
I love a good analytical framework. Break down Hofstede for us. How does it explain the sauce?
Let's look at the dimension of uncertainty avoidance. Both Malaysia and South Korea score very high on this specific metric.
Uncertainty avoidance, meaning basically we hate not knowing what is going to happen next.
Exactly. It means both societies deeply dislike ambiguity. We panic when the rules aren't completely clear. Both cultures actually find a lot of comfort in strict structures and hierarchies and incredibly detailed manuals.
Okay, so how does that apply to JAKIM?
Well, when JAKIM hands Minho a massive 500-page manual of halal protocols, an American business owner might see that as massive government oppression. An American might say, let me be free to innovate, get out of my way.
Right, the free market mindset.
But a Korean technologist, a Korean looks at that massive manual and thinks, finally, clear instructions.
So the intense bureaucracy is actually their shared love language.
Yes. It creates what we call a safe space for commerce. The heavy reliance on memorandums of understanding, on strict MOUs, on rigorous certifications, it isn't about being difficult or creating friction. It is entirely about reducing uncertainty.
Because once that halal stamp is finally on the bottle, the uncertainty is completely gone.
The trust becomes absolute. That shared psychological need for structure and rules is exactly why these two nations work so well together, despite the very real surface-level cultural and religious differences.
And it builds a bridge to the consumer, too. When a Malaysian consumer sees that JAKIM logo on a Korean product, they know the company did the incredibly hard work. They showed actual respect for the local norms.
It stops being a foreign, potentially suspicious product and starts being safe.
Okay, what about the other dimensions in Hofstede's framework? Are there other overlaps?
Yes, consider the collectivism dimension. Both societies are highly collectivistic. The harmony and success of the group matters significantly more than individual expression.
So for Minho.
For Minho, he prioritizes the group's economic health, meaning his company's survival, their long-term partnership with the Malaysian distributor, the regional stability over his individual ego, or his personal attachment to the quote-unquote original recipe.
That is the pragmatism we talked about earlier.
It is institutional efficacy in action. Instead of fighting over cultural purity on Instagram or TikTok, the corporations and the governments engage in highly pragmatic negotiation. They view the halal industry not as some restrictive religious imposition, but as a massive, lucrative market opportunity.
And it goes way beyond just spicy sauce now, right?
Absolutely. The sources note that South Korea is now aggressively looking at halal cosmetics, halal pharmaceuticals, you name it. They are adapting to survive and thrive together.
So we have the hard reality of the physical factories and the supply chains. We have the cultural negotiation of the halal standards. But there is one more layer to this relationship, the soft stuff. The stuff that actually makes people feel something on a personal level.
Right.
We have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or I guess, given the context, the flower boy in the room. We have to talk about K-pop and the Korean wave.
Tell you. Arguably South Korea's most potent export globally, and perhaps even more influential than their semiconductors in the long run. This is the realm of pure soft power.
And this is usually where the online beef actually flares up, right? People aren't arguing about copper foil on Twitter. They are arguing about values. They are arguing about identity and societal norms.
Correct. The friction almost always centers on a clash of masculinities and social values.
The notes dive into this concept of soft masculinity, and I think we really need to unpack this carefully because it is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people.
It is a fascinating sociological development to observe. So in academic terms, we are looking at the stark contrast between traditional hegemonic masculinity, which has historically been dominant in Malaysia, and the condomin, or flower boy, aesthetic that is heavily exported by K-pop.
Okay, let's define terms. Hegemonic masculinity. That's the traditional provider, the stoic protector, the tough leader.
The hang-to-a art, essentially.
It is rigid. It is physically strong, and the boundaries of what makes a man are very clearly defined.
Exactly. Then you have the condomin aesthetic. Think of bands like BTS, for example.
Okay.
The men wear makeup. They are highly invested in high fashion. They are openly emotionally expressive. They perform cuteness, which is known as aegyo in Korean culture.
And for a lot of traditional folks, that is incredibly jarring.
It creates massive cognitive dissonance. For conservative elements in Malaysia, or even for state authorities, this alternative version of masculinity can look like a genuine threat. It looks like a dilution of what it fundamentally means to be a man.
You see concerns raised in the media about the lalaki lembut phenomena, the softening of men.
And this is exactly where those online accusations of cultural disrespect or bad influence usually stem from. The comments section isn't really mad about noodles. They are anxious about changing societal norms.
But here is the massive paradox.
Yeah.
Despite that friction, despite the very vocal conservative pushback, who is actually topping the charts in Kuala Lumpur, who's selling out massive stadiums in minutes.
Blackpink, BTS. The consumption of this media is astronomical.
Right.
And it isn't just passive consumption on Spotify, it translates to physical travel. We have to talk about the seedy narrative from our research of the Malaysian tourist exploring Seoul.
Let's picture Seedy. She is one of the 400,000 South Korean tourists visiting Malaysia, or in her specific case, one of the hundreds of thousands of Malaysians heading to Seoul every year. She's standing on a busy street corner in Gangnam, looking for a specific coffee shop she saw in a K-drama.
It's essentially a modern cultural pilgrimage. But notice what actually happens when she gets there. She doesn't feel like an alien. She interacts with the locals, and there is an unspoken connection.
They share certain core Eastern values.
Exactly. Things like an ingrained respect for elders, the specific way you hand over a credit card with two hands, the collectivist mindset we discussed earlier, it all resonates.
So she isn't going to Seoul to become Korean. She is going there and expanding her own Malaysian identity.
It perfectly represents Eastern civilizational dynamism. The massive popularity of K-pop in Malaysia isn't about Malaysians desperately wanting to be westernized. It is about Malaysians finding a modern, globally relevant identity that is still distinctly and proudly Asian.
It validates the idea that you can be wealthy, modern, and creative without just copying the West.
Precisely. It breaks the Western-centric framework of modernization.
And the South Korean government is completely aware of this dynamic, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just a happy accident of really catchy pop songs.
Oh, not at all. This is highly calculated statecraft. It falls directly under South Korea's new Southern policy, or the NSP.
The NSP.
Right.
Sounds very official. What is the elevator pitch for the new Southern policy?
It's built on the 3 Ps: people, prosperity, and peace. It was originally launched by President Moon Jae, but the grand strategic direction continues to this day. The ultimate goal was to elevate ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, to the exact same diplomatic and economic level as the traditional Big Four powers.
The Big Four being the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan.
Yes.
That is a massive strategic pivot. Usually, Southeast Asian nations are treated as the little guys in the room, just pawns for the superpowers.
It was a pivot born out of absolute necessity. South Korea woke up and realized it was strategically trapped. It was entirely too dependent on the United States for military security and way too dependent on China for export trade.
And when the U.S. and China fight, which they constantly do, Korea gets squeezed in the middle.
Exactly. They needed a third pillar. They desperately needed to build a peace community to diversify their risk.
So they looked south.
They looked south. They saw ASEAN, a region with a massive, young, growing population, abundant natural resources, and a shared, deep-seated desire for geopolitical neutrality.
So wait, when I am sitting on my couch watching a K-drama, or when Citi is booking her tourist flight to Seoul, we are technically participating in South Korea's grand geopolitical diversification strategy.
You are the absolute core of the people pillar. By falling in love with the culture, you are actively insulating South Korea from Chinese economic coercion. Think about it. If China suddenly boycotts a Korean conglomerate like Lotte, which they have actually done over missile defense deployments, Lotte can pivot and sell their goods to Malaysia or Indonesia, but they can only successfully sell to Malaysia if Malaysians already like and trust Korean culture.
Wow. It really changes how you look at a concert ticket, doesn't it? It is not just disposable entertainment. It is literal geopolitical insurance.
Tourism and culture are the grease in the gears of hard diplomacy. You simply cannot maintain a long-term strategic partnership if the populations despise each other. The soft power is what makes the hard power possible.
Speaking of hard power, let's zoom all the way out for this final segment. We have covered the billions in trade, the complex supply chains, the religious negotiations, and the pop culture phenomenon. Now let's look at the global map, the geopolitical big picture.
The broader context here is what we call the Asian century. We are witnessing a definitive historic shift of global power and influence from the West to the East. The Asian giants, China, India, Japan, South Korea, they are actively redefining the global order as we speak.
And where does Malaysia fit into that massive shift? We are a pivotal state in Southeast Asia, sure, but we are relatively small compared to those giants.
Malaysia plays an incredibly crucial role as a hedging state.
Hedging, like in finance, betting on both sides so you don't lose your shirt.
Exactly like finance. Malaysia absolutely does not want to be forced to choose sides between the United States and China. That is an incredibly dangerous game for a smaller nation.
Because if you side with the U.S., you deeply anger your biggest trading partner, China.
And if you side entirely with China, you lose your vital security guarantees and tech investments from the West. So you hedge. You play the middle.
And South Korea fits into this hedging strategy. Exactly.
South Korea is the absolute perfect middle power partner for Malaysia. It is exceptionally rich, it is high-tech, it is Asian, but most importantly, it is not a superpower with imperial ambitions.
Right, South Korea isn't trying to culturally dominate the region or claim territory in the South China Sea.
Correct. It allows Malaysia to diversify its geopolitical friends. The sources mention a very interesting concept regarding this. They call it GDP, but they completely rebrand the acronym.
Yes, the GDP of the 21st century. But they definitely don't mean gross domestic product.
No, they redefine it as geopolitics, democracy, and peace. The core argument is that true, sustainable progress in the Asian century doesn't just come from raw economic output. It comes from how these 3 specific elements interact to create regional stability.
And this interaction isn't just high-level academic theory. It is happening right now in defense right now.
Yeah.
Look at the F-A-50 fighter jets.
Yes, the F-A-50s. Malaysia recently signed a massive deal to purchase a fleet of these light combat aircraft from Korea Aerospace Industries.
That is a huge commitment. Buying fighter jets is basically like a marriage. You are stuck with that specific technology, the maintenance, the upgrades, for 20 or 30 years.
It creates deep interoperability. It means Malaysian Air Force pilots and Korean pilots will intrinsically understand the exact same operational systems. It means Malaysian mechanics will be trained side by Korean engineers. It permanently weaves the defense and security establishments of the two countries together.
And it isn't just weapon systems, it's the actual infrastructure of our cities. The note specifically mentions smart city projects happening in Kota,
which loops right back to the SK Nexilis battery investment we talked about at the beginning. South Korea isn't just dropping a factory in Sabah and leaving. They are actively exporting their entire smart city model. They are helping local governments upgrade their water management systems using advanced sensors, implementing AI for traffic management, and building out the foundational digital infrastructure of Sabah.
That is literal nation-building stuff.
It is a completely holistic approach to partnership, and it really underscores why the online beef is so incredibly illusory. If your governments are actively sharing classified blueprints for smart cities and interoperable fighter jets, you are not enemies over a bowl of noodles. You are close allies navigating a very complex, very dangerous world together.
We started this deep dive with a viral video of spicy noodles and a flood of angry nationalistic comments. We started with the iceberg illusion.
And we ended up discovering the quiet lattice.
We tracked the journey through three main narratives. First, we looked at the hard reality, the $24 billion trade volume, the copper foil in Sabah that is 1/10 the thickness of a human hair. That proved the economic integration is physical, it's green, and it's vital to the global supply chain.
Then we looked at the cultural negotiation, the story of Minho and the strict Halal certification process. We saw how psychological traits like uncertainty, avoidance, and collectivism actually help these two nations navigate their differences and build unshakable trust through rigorous bureaucracy.
And finally, we explored the civilizational dynamism, the K-pop connection, the massive flow of 400,000 tourists, the way soft masculinity challenges traditional norms, but ultimately connects us to a vibrant, modern Asian identity that doesn't rely on the West.
And you have to remember, these aren't just isolated, quirky anecdotes. They are the underlying operating system of the entire geopolitical relationship.
I really love that metaphor we landed on earlier. The beef is the glitch, the partnership in the operating system.
It really is the most accurate way to view the situation. The social media algorithm fundamentally benefits from your outrage. It highlights the glitch because glitches are visually interesting. Conflict keeps you scrolling. But the operating system, the OS, is what actually keeps the lights on. It is what puts money in the bank, and it's what keeps the entire region safe from superpower coercion.
And that OS is running on a very stable, continually updated version right now, completely, regardless of what someone on Twitter or TikTok says.
The historical convergence of Malaysia's Look East policy and South Korea's New Southern policy means we are seeing a true maturation of the relationship. It is no longer just Malaysia looking up to and learning from Korea. It is a highly balanced two-way exchange.
Malaysia provides the vital green energy potential, the strategic geographic location, and the global halal market expertise. And Korea provides the cutting-edge tech, the capital, and the defense manufacturing.
It is a genuine partnership of equals.
It creates a sense of regional resilience that is entirely homegrown. It is not dictated or imposed by Western powers. It is Malaysia and South Korea proactively figuring out how to be modern, prosperous, and secure Asian nations together.
Even when the internet tries its hardest to pull them apart.
Ben, I think that is the most important takeaway for you listening today. When you see that next outrage video pop up on your feed, when you see the comments section exploding over a misunderstood cultural gesture or a dramatic food review, just pause. Look past the noise and look at the actual data. Look at the billion-dollar factories being built. Look at the thousands of tourists sharing coffee. The reality is that the Eastern identity is currently being rewritten not by angry politicians or algorithms, but by ordinary people who choose to see the similarities in their neighbors rather than the differences amplified by a screen. The beef is just a digital glitch, but the partnership is the reality that sustains us all.